name is Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and a Professor of Enology. Welcome to this evening's forum program. As a public university, we pursue a mission of excellence in education and research for the benefit of California and the world. We have a mandate to disseminate knowledge and to foster a dialogue with the public through events such as this one. Your input is important to help define the questions of the future. Forum presents an array of research and scientific advancements in the fields of wine, brewing, and food in order to highlight the value of UC Davis research to the California economy. Today's program is of particular interest because this technology has the potential to radically change the source of a very important part of our diet. Imagine a future where culturing could be the standard source of meat. Today, we will first hear from David Block. He is chair of the Department of Viticulture and Enology and holds the Ernest Gallo Endowed Chair in Viticulture and Enology. His research has covered numerous topics, including the advancement of fermentation modeling, metabolic optimization of microbes for biofuels, and catalytic conversion of waste streams into added value chemicals. Block has won many awards for his teaching and is recognized on campus for his leadership. He and a team of UC Davis researchers recently received a large NSF grant to study the challenges of producing cultured meat. So we have asked him to come here today to speak to you. David.
Hey, Andy. So thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about a relatively new area of research for me personally and for UC Davis, and I think just in general in academia. And that's what I want to focus on today is UC Davis and how we're helping the field of cultivated meat to grow rapidly. So I'd like to start by talking about what is cultivated meat. Normally, the normal conventional agriculture is to raise a cow like the one that you see here, and from that, we get the steak. Now, of course, there's a lot of steps in between that and before that. It's much more complicated than what I've pictured here, but this is the conventional agriculture. You have cattle that you grow and then you slaughter them to provide the meat. So what's cultivated meat and how does it differ from that? For cultivated meat, what we do is we actually take cells from the cow and we grow those cells up, and those cells are either things like muscle cells or stem cells. We grow them up in a fermenter, probably even larger scale than the one I picture here. And from that, we create a meat product. So cultivated meat, as opposed to other meat alternatives, is actual cells from an animal, a cow, a chicken, a pig, or and so forth. So let's talk about this process a little bit more detail. How do we actually get those cells from the cow and grow them into some sort of meat product? And so I've drawn a very simplified schematic of what that looks like. And this isn't necessarily the process that would be used in industry, but it's kind of my idea of how this might work. And so what we would do is we start with some frozen cells that have been isolated from a cow, for instance, and we grow that up in progressively larger sizes, growing more and more and more cells. Probably we'd be using stem cells for this because they grow for much longer periods of time than other types of cells. And when we get to the largest scale, which might be, let's say, 25,000 liters or maybe even more, we differentiate those cells into muscle cells, into fat cells, and connective tissue cells, because this is what makes up the meat that we eat. Those three kinds of cells could be mixed together into what I call an unstructured product, like a hamburger kind of thing. Or we could take those and somehow print them into a form to structure them into something like a steak or a chicken breast or a salmon fillet that actually has structure. Now, what's interesting about this approach is people have grown animal cells in large scale before, but this is to actually produce a biopharmaceutical, like a monoclonal antibody. So if you're watching television and you see a pharmaceutical ad come on and it ends in the letters MAB, it was probably produced in this way because it's a monoclonal antibody. Now, what's interesting about the monoclonal antibody process is it is a place to start for figuring out how to grow mammalian cells in large scale. But unfortunately, if we copy that exactly, we're going to end up with a very, very expensive hamburger because the monoclonal antibodies that are produced this way sell for about $1 million a pound. And there are going to be very few hamburgers sold at $1 million a pound. But we don't have to despair because there are fermentation products that are made this way, usually with microbes that are produced at very large scale, um, hundreds of thousands of gallon scale, and are produced and sold for $10 a pound or less, which is what we would expect meat to be sold for. And these are things that you eat every day or use every day, things like wine and beer, soy sauce, citric acid is made through fermentation, vitamin C has a fermentation step in it in the production, things like monosodium glutamate or MSG that's used as a flavor enhancer, xanthan gum that's used in all kinds of foods. And these are produced at very large scale, very inexpensively. And this is probably more the model that we'll have to follow in order to get a product to market. Because at this point, there's only one product on the market, and that's just in Singapore. And I'm sure that Eric will be talking more about that as well. Why is this important? Well, as the population grows between now and let's say 2050, up to 9 billion people, we're going to need a lot more sources of protein. And the World Food Center here on campus has estimated that we're going to need 60%, a 60% increase in food. And that has to come from somewhere. So what are the solutions? One of the solutions is to expand conventional animal agriculture, like we talked about, raise more animals to create more protein. And of course, that has all kinds of potential issues, land use issues, food safety issues, animal rights issues, all kinds of issues that people think about. And so there are other possible sources. One would be to develop protein alternatives. This would be like plant-based meat alternatives like Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meat burgers. So that's another possibility. And the third possibility is to create new means for producing actual meat, and this is cultivated meat. And so if you could figure out a way to do this, you could solve a huge problem that's looming as the population grows in the world. So is this a viable alternative of cultivated meat? Well, for let's say 5 or 6 years ago, there were only a couple companies out there. And fast forward 4 or 5 years, and now there's over 50 companies in this area. And if you look at the amount of money that's been invested, it's growing exponentially. And I only have up to 2019 here. But if you were to look at 2020, I think that you could safely say that the capital invested between 2019 and 2020 actually doubled as well. So it's still growing exponentially. And there's one product on the market. So there's a huge amount of promise for this area. So what are the hurdles right now that are holding the industry back? There are three main hurdles that I would say. One is having cell lines that grow when you need them to grow and differentiate when you need them to differentiate. The second hurdle is having cheap media, the nutrients that the cells grow on for cell growth, and to scale that up to very large scale instead of tiny scale that we use in the lab. And the third is, how do you create a structured product? So not just a hamburger, but a steak that has the same nutritional value, tastes the same, or tastes really good, and has the mouthfeel so that when you chew it, it feels like you're eating meat with structure. And these are the key hurdles that we have to overcome. So given that, that's a good place to start talking about what's happening at UC Davis. At UC Davis, our efforts here are relatively new. This is a whole new field, but we've been working at this for about 2 years now. So this started with me being at a conference, Food Innovation and Engineering Conference, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers held late in 2018. And I heard a speaker from the Good Food Institute, which is an organization that promotes meat alternatives. And I had, at the same time, I had a student who was very interested in working on optimization methods I'll talk about a little bit later in my talk. And I connected the two and thought, wow, this would be a great area to work on because media optimization, or the optimization of the nutrients for growing these cells, is really an important hurdle that we need to overcome. And that's what we were working on for other systems. So we had conversations with the Good Food Institute early in 2019 and got our first 2 grants in this area to work in this area with New Harvest. It's my students, Zach Casenza and Ted O'Neill, with my collaborator, Keith Barr, by the middle of 2019. By the end of 2019, we formed the UC Davis Cultivated Meat Consortium, which is a group of about 30 researchers on campus who are very interested in working in this area. And by early in 2020, we also had funding from the Good Food Institute with collaborators Karen McDonald and Soman Nandi in chemical engineering at UC Davis. And we decided to put in a proposal to the National Science Foundation for a much larger effort in this area. I'll talk a little bit more about that grant, but it was awarded. We started in October. And I will say by May of this year, we will have over 13 faculty members working in this area with 10 graduate students, at least 10 graduate students, and 5 to 10 undergraduates working in this area as well. So we'll go from very little in this area to probably one of the largest academic efforts in the world on cultivated meat. So I want to say a little bit more about the NSF proposal. It wasn't a call for proposals in cultivated meat. It was actually a call for growing convergence. And what NSF meant by growing convergence is they wanted grants that addressed a very compelling problem in society, like not having enough food to feed the amount of people on the earth, and deep integration across disciplines. And this is an area that really requires a whole bunch of disciplines to really tackle those hurdles that I talked about earlier. So again, there are 13 principal investigators on this grant, 13 faculty members. It's about $3.5 million over 5 years. And notably, this is the first federal funding from the US government in the area of cultivated meat. So we're very proud of that and very happy to have this funding at UC Davis. Now, what does this proposal do? Well, these are kind of, there's 4 objectives, and I can distill them into the first 3 being those first 3 hurdles they talked about: developing cell lines, inexpensive media, and structured products. The 4th objective is to really do an in-depth analysis of all of the steps in terms of looking at economic viability. What are the economic hurdles for getting the product to market? And how sustainable is this compared to conventional animal agriculture? And that's really important to understand. Is this going to be more sustainable or as sustainable as conventional animal agriculture? And we're collecting the information that you need to do that analysis, and we have the collaborators for doing that. Well, convergence requires people from all different disciplines, and this is a problem very well suited for that. And what you can see is here, each of these circles represents a faculty member at UC Davis working in this area, and they're kind of color-coded by the academic background, from stem cells to muscle physiology to agricultural economics and bioprocess engineering and tissue engineering and so forth. And so we have all these people on campus, which makes UC Davis a terrific place to be studying these areas. And so we can actually then look, if we group these people on which of the different objectives they're working on, you can see that for each of these objectives, we need people from very different disciplines to solve these very difficult technical hurdles. And that's the exciting thing about this for a researcher, is to be able to work with people you've never worked with before and areas you may never have collaborated with before, to solve these really hard but very interesting scientific problems that not only are they interesting scientifically, but when we think about it, these are problems that are solved. These are issues. If we solve them, we're solving real world important problems to feed a growing population. So other than research, what are we planning to do? Well, other than research that's going to hopefully help the industry to grow and develop, we're going to be training students who will be the workforce of tomorrow for the cultivated meat industry. We're having monthly seminars to disseminate information We're going to be working very closely with the industry, and Eric, who's speaking to you next, is one of those people from companies that uh, we are already working with, and we're planning to do continuing education or extension for the industry. Um, so these are all the things that we need to do to help the industry grow. And I should point out that a lot of those companies are actually in Northern California or in California, which makes this even more important for UC Davis. Why is UC Davis a good place to do this? UC Davis is really good at this kind of thing, at working with industry to help them to have a trained workforce, to help them have continuing education and so forth. And one of the indications of that is the main department that I'm in right now, that I chair right now, and that's the Department of Viticulture and Enology, that is really credited with helping California's wine industry grow from almost nothing, let's say 50 or 60 years ago, into the powerhouse it is now economically and in terms of quality, wine quality for it's basically a global player. We're making world-class wines, and a lot of that can be traced back to having institutions like UC Davis to help the wine industry grow. And what we'd like to do is the same kind of thing for the cultivated meat industry. And again, we'll be able to put all those tools that we've developed for wine or for coffee or for olives and olive oil or honey or leafy green vegetables or nuts or any of those things that UC Davis has worked on towards cultivated meat. Okay, so with that, I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about giving you an example of the kind of research that we're doing. And I'm going to talk about the research that I'm working on in my lab with my collaborator, Keith Barr, who's a muscle physiologist and tissue specialist in muscle tissue culture. And what we're working on is how do you develop a very inexpensive plant-based growth media for growing cultivated meat cells and having them differentiate into muscle cells, fat cells, and connective tissue cells. So this is one of the key hurdles. And right now, the media that people are using is way too expensive and still has animal-derived products in it. And so what we'd like to do is figure out how to come up with a very inexpensive growth media. Turns out this is something that I've worked on for other types of cells in the past, and now we're actually applying this to grow animal cells. What's the problem here? Optimizing growth media is really difficult. And why is it really difficult? Well, the list of ingredients that I have here are the ingredients that go into the media for growing mammalian cells for pharmaceutical fermentation processes. So there's a whole bunch of vitamins and cofactors. There's salts, there's amino acids, there's sugars like glucose, and there's something called fetal bovine serum, which comes from baby cows, and it's really important to growing cells in a lot of cell culture media. But it's A, very expensive, and B, very complex, and C, very variable, and it comes from a baby cow, and these are all good reasons to try and get rid of it. And so what we tried to do is we took some cells and we're trying to actually come up with, as a first step, how can we reduce the fetal bovine serum or eliminate it and pick the right concentration of all these other ingredients to reduce the cost and increase the cell growth. Well, how do we do this? Traditionally, there are a couple different methods I show here for how to do this. One is to try random combinations. And as you can imagine, that's not very efficient, but it's used quite a bit in industry. Another way of doing this is to just take one of those things on the list at a time and find the optimal concentration, holding everything else constant, and just do it one at a time. You imagine if there are interactions between those different ingredients, this isn't going to be very efficient either, or end up with a really optimized media. So then you could use, the next best thing is to use these methods here, either factorial, fractional factorial design methods or response surface methodology. Collectively, these are called design of experiments or DOE, or sometimes statistically designed experiments. And these are methods that are used out there in industry, and they're far better than the ones on the left, but they're still not very efficient when you have lots of different ingredients. and the ingredients are complex. And so what we've done over the years, and especially even more so recently, is to try and speed up process development or media optimization by using artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the details here, but I just want to give you a flavor for how that would work. So what we do is we try and accumulate knowledge in an artificial intelligence method, like an artificial neural network. So we're building a model, and as we get more and more information, that model gets really much better. So as we predict the outcome from the inputs, it becomes better and better and better. And what I'm going to show you here uh, is a two-dimensional model. So you can picture one of these directions as being one of those media components, and the other one another media component concentration. And what you're going to see evolve here is uh, an actual model for that will develop over time and get better and better and better and more detailed. And as it does, we can use optimization algorithms to pick out what's the next set of experiments to run that's going to lead us towards the optimal media. And so I'm going to show you this now, and hopefully it will become more clear. These little circles on here are the initial experiments that are going to be done, and you'll see as this evolves, you'll see where the algorithm shows you that the next experiment should be. So you can see you start to get more structure, and you can see the red circles are where the experiments are, so that now it's suggesting to run experiments here. Now it's suggesting to run experiments here. And as the model evolves, you see it gets better and better and closer to the actual surface, which looks like the one that you have here. And the actual optimum is this combination down here where you have the red square. And so you keep on going until you don't get any better media. Okay. And so we use that for it to grow actually mouse cells on this DMEM, which is commercial media with fetal bovine serum. And over time, the experiments, we run 10 experiments at a time. And what you can see is this is the best experiment. And this metric is the highest concentration of cells at 2 days divided by the cost of the media. And you can see it continues to get better, at least until you get to 60 experiments. The blue line is using these design of experiments. And the yellow line here is where the traditional media falls. On the right side, we can see how well the cells grow, and the media with our new method and with the one from design of experiments grow way better at 2 days than the traditional media, right? And they're going to cost less. The important thing here is that our method found this optimum in 60 to 70 experiments instead of 100. So it's way more efficient than traditional methods. And this is really important when the experiments are very expensive and very time consuming, as they would be to develop an actual cultivated meat product. So this kind of gives you a flavor for what we're doing. And I'll just end by acknowledging Zach Cosenza and Ted O'Neill, who are the students working on this project. Professor Keith Barr, my collaborator, all my colleagues in the UC Davis Cultivated Meat Consortium, and then the funding that comes from New Harvest, Good Food Institute, and NSF. And so with that, I think I'll stop.
Thanks, David, for showing us insights into the challenges of producing cultivated meat. I'll just remind the audience to post your questions to the Q&A tool, although we're already getting, you and Eric should be prepared, we're already getting a lot of questions. So for our second speaker, I'd like to introduce Eric Schulze. Eric is a molecular biologist, genetic engineer, science policy strategist, STEM educator, TV presenter, and former federal biotechnology regulator. He's currently vice president of product and regulation at Memphis Meats, where he leads the design and development of the company's first ever cell-based meat products, as well as its regulatory, policy, and government affairs areas. He previously served as senior scientist for Memphis Meats, and before that he served as a U.S. Food and Drug Administrator, a regulator within the Obama administration, handling a portfolio of novel drug and food products. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, so just give me 1 second. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Dr. Waterhouse. I want to thank Dr. Block, and I want to thank the staff at UC Davis for being amazing hosts. It's always a pleasure to work with really great people. A theme that runs through a lot of the work at Memphis Meats. And so I just want to start by echoing some of the things that Dr. Block's wonderful intro brought up. And I'll say this multiple times that there's two things that I'll emphasize, and I hope you take away from this, if nothing else, is one, nothing happens in these fields of innovation, these innovation cycles, by yourself. What we do fundamentally rests on the interplay of the communities we build. And that in this case is, of course, interplay between academia and industry. And I bring a unique set of experiences in that I've worked in every single industry around this particular area, and working in the federal government and public service. I've worked in academia, and now I work in industry. I'll talk a little bit about that more, but I just want to emphasize that a community is what builds this. And as this industry grows, we'll need you. And that's the second point, the role of you listening in the audience today. And I just want to appeal to you directly, wherever you're coming from. I want you to know that it's not going to be, you're going to hear from me, you're hearing from Dr. Block, you're hearing about this wonderful work, but it's going to be you that takes this industry to the next level. We're going to get out of market and produce wonderful products like you see right now. But I'm excited about what you will do for this industry and what technology lies beyond the cultured meat products we're talking about. So anyway, my name's Eric. I'm the Vice President of Product and Regulation at Memphis Meats. I am proud to show you my products along here and the team's products as well. So this, I say my as in the team that designed this, but there's a wonderful team of people behind it that got us to being able to put this product, this poultry on this plate. We've got a team of over 80 people now that have joined Memphis Meats that are now working to design these products, and I'm happy to represent their efforts. So we'll move on to the next slide. I'd like to just also just show a couple of products that we produce. These are our beef meatballs and what we can do in culture meat. Dr. Block is correct. This is happening. These products are real. We're able to produce them in a high quality and consistent and delicious way, and produce them safely. Most important, you'll hear about that in a second. And ultimately, they are delicious. Here's that poultry product I showed you earlier, and it is as beautiful on the inside as it on the outside, because it is chicken. It is real meat, and Memphis Meats produces real meat, poultry, and seafood products directly from animal cells, just like Dr. Block mentioned. A point of note about Memphis Meats: we were the first company in this space in 2015 when we founded this entire industry. And again, correctly noted by Dr. Block, that since then, this industry has blossomed. I'll talk more about that. There's over 60 companies worldwide, but Memphis Meats was the very first company in this space. And we're excited to be able to bring these products to you and also work with UC Davis in this particular endeavor. Highlighting sort of our global ambitions in some of this space. Also, and is a lesser consumed protein here in the United States, but consumed much more widely. This is duck. These are our duck skewers. These are all cultured products that we've produced at our that our wonderful team has produced in here in Berkeley, California. So this gets to a very important question of why. Why bother? And it comes down to, for us, simply put, people want to eat meat, and the world's population is growing. There'll be about 10 billion people by 2050. The demand for food is going to skyrocket, and it's very hard to put into practical terms that are graspable by most people exactly how large the meat industry and the food industry is. The scale of food production is immense in order to be able to grasp and be able to feed 7 billion people, let alone 10. So to just, the one thing I like putting in is former USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue said it best, in my opinion. To be able to feed 10 billion people simultaneously in 2050, we'll need to produce as much, the same amount of food over the next 50 years as we have in the history of humanity up to this point. And in that time, meat demand is expected to double. So we want to be able to give people the product that they want to eat. We want people to be able to eat meat if they like it. I eat meat. I want to continue to eat it, but I also understand that it's important to give people options. So at Memphis Meats, we believe that we're an and, not an or solution for the market. We want people to choose to be able to eat meat if they like to. One thing I like to do quickly is just take a glance at this and ask yourself which one of these products is a conventional product that we just picked up at a grocery store, and which one is a cultured meat product that we produced in our facility. I'll just give you a second to think about it. And if you're thinking, and if you're looking at that one on the right, you'd be incorrect. It's the one on the left. Now, when I've run this many, many times, it splits about 50-50. People tend to guess wrong or incorrectly. And I think that's because it is poultry, it is chicken, it is meat. And so there isn't a lot of difference. But I do say this because I think it also highlights that the parity that we're able to achieve. Getting to some, obviously one of the largest areas that we want to address as a new and nascent industry is, do consumers want such a product? And the answer seems to be resoundingly yes. Consumers want to eat these products. And more evidence is coming through every day that they want to eat them, and for a variety of reasons. The question then, of course, the next thing that begs the question is being able to get on market and being able to eat it and seeing what consumers think about those products once we are, in fact, on market. And of course, as well, we at scaled production, we do project that there'll be significant reductions in land, water, and greenhouse gas emissions, which is for a lot of people that are getting into space, I think, or that consumers that have a climate change mindset and want to place their purchasing on the background of a changing and evolving world and a warming world, being able to choose products as well that help be able to address that is important as well. One of the other things that I think is really important as well is also being able to address things such as bacterial contamination and food waste issues. And so here's a very just simple representative or exemplar experiment we ran, where we took bacterial plates and we swabbed them with conventional poultry, organic poultry, or our own poultry. And since our product, as you heard from Dr. Block and all other people that are producing products this way, are aseptic, meaning there's no bacteria or living things other than your meat cells in them, if there's any bacteria, these plates will grow them. As you can see, every little dot is a bacterial colony. And not unexpectedly, conventional and organic poultry have bacteria. Now, by the way, this is not to say that bacteria are bad. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just that the potential for food waste could be reduced. And it's also something that, again, industry as a whole this is something that we'll all be working on in some way, shape, or form. So again, Dr. Block mentioned this, and I just want to highlight, when we were the first company in this space, and we debuted our meatball, and we debuted it, and it was at the resoundingly low cost of $18,000 a pound. By the way, that was much lower than the previous record by significantly. But you can imagine, look at the products that are all being produced. These are all versions of a cultured meat product produced by all these companies in this space. And it's incredible. We're in a legitimate, full-on, food-based space race. And it is fantastic to be sitting in the front seat. And the competition is so wonderful, and collegiality is fantastic across the globe. And there's now over 60 companies vying for space in the market. And so this begs the question of, like, how do we produce these products? I was asked to talk about sort of how do I approach the design as a member of the team in our products. Well, I can tell you that the strategic design for a meat product requires having a very distinct empirical and aesthetic position on the following statements. And those are what meat is and what meat can be. And depending on how you approach that, if you are thinking about getting into this field, I think really sets your strategic viewpoint on how you approach the design of meat. And yes, I say design of meat. That then leads into sort of how do you even get down this road of designing. So this road to the market, which is ultimately everyone's goal, we want to be able to sell our products to you all. Is you have to decide, are you producing a novel food or using a novel process to produce a familiar food? And it has important regulatory implications depending on how you choose that, and also the jurisdictions. Also then, having a guiding principle, and for us that's safe, delicious, and sustainable, and that means both environmentally and operationally, that guides your product decisions. And of course, your first and last question in theory should be, how are we earning the consumer's trust? At the end of the day, we want people to buy these. And so most food products, therefore, again, thinking about this a little differently, are designed and therefore for meat require a reframing. We build our cultured meat from the cell up, not the animal down. And that's an important nuance that's very important to consider when approaching a cultured meat product. And then at the end of the day, very practically speaking, there's no substitute for effective sensory analysis. Do people like your product? And if they do, you're on a great track. I am a former federal regulator and policymaker, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this in my role as designer of our products, also head of our regulatory and government affairs, and the intersection of safety and deliciousness is sort of how I look at my role. And this is former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who has since left the agency and also become a voice in the COVID crisis, and then former USDA Secretary Perdue. And this is them discussing the arrangement for the regulation of cultured meat products. So I'll go through very briefly at the high level. And so the question is, most people's eyes glaze over why we talk about regulation. But I can tell you as a former regulator, it's very important that it's the first and last pillar in your discussion of building consumer trust in the US and abroad. Regulatory system is necessary to ensure safe products are held to an appropriate standard and that are allowed to be sold legally. And if you can't legally sell your product, you have very limited options for how you determine the value of your product or your company. So I just want to just briefly touch on this, but the important pathway that I want to emphasize is that the regulatory pathway in the US uses very well-established regulatory conventions. So what do I mean by that? Even though this is a relatively new process for producing a very, very familiar product, meat, the FDA and USDA are not doing anything new. They're using existing pathways to regulate the safety of these products because they see them as very conventional products. So on the right-hand side, FDA and USDA have agreed to regulate these products. We're very proud to have worked with the agencies on this. So very clearly, FDA regulates seafood. They do this already. They currently regulate all seafood products and their safety. USDA regulates meat and poultry, as it currently does, and that is how they'll regulate cultured products. FDA will take seafood. USDA will take meat and poultry. FDA will establish the safety of all cultured products, whether they be meat, poultry, or seafood. That's exactly how they do this right now for any new ingredient for meat, poultry, and seafood. FDA establishes its safety and then makes its recommendations to other agencies. That's no different than for cultured meat products as well. And USDA will regulate the inspections and labels for meat, poultry, and FDA will do its job on seafood. So the important thing to take away here is that there's no new regulations have been needed nor required, and we're just using the existing systems to efficiently regulate our products and establish the safety. Now, Dr. Block also mentioned correctly that the only place that we have an approval for these products is in Singapore. The SFA in Singapore has approved Just or Eat Just's chicken product, cultured chicken product. I can say unequivocally, it's a great move for the industry. It's overall fantastic that we have an approval anywhere in the world to consume our products. It's a great vote of confidence. And I can just say that it's just step one in many, right? We have so many places in the US we have to seek approval, and we can't wait we think we hopefully can be first there too. But, and then there's Europe, and then of course the Asia Pacific rim as well. There's lots of opportunity to be able to seek approvals for products. And we're thrilled for Just for getting on market in Singapore. So switching gears just slightly, is this notion of technical areas of development that we'll have to solve for. And again, Dr. Blog mentioned these, and I'll just I want to reiterate a few. And it is so unbelievably, I think, obvious to anyone who's worked here that it really comes down to cost and scale. There really is no other two levers that you have to solve for in order to make a product viable in any new space. The work is in the details, of course, but the cost to manufacture is the key driver, and our ability to scale that food production safely and high quality is also the second part of that equation. We have to operate the entire industry to operate around solving those two equations. And then, of course, always regulatory compliance is always going to be the first and last step of this, but it's also the first step to gaining and maintaining consumer trust and identifying demand. And then, of course, new sector opportunities as companies get on market, they bring their products out, and we see and find what do consumers really want? What do they need? So what elements can help ensure the success of the meat, poultry, and seafood industry? Well, there's lots we could talk about, but I really want to focus on a couple of things. And I believe this is someone who's worked in all three areas as a policymaker, as a professional scientist, and a designer of food in this case, and also a regulator of products as well. A robust global industry that sparks competition among producers is really important. I talked about that previously, the space race. The second thing is this spinning flywheel of an intersector innovation. What do I mean by that? I mean the private industry and then the public safety sector, or the government in this case, and academia, all influencing each other through their innovation and pushing ideas through each other and checking each other with a series of checks and balances and new information and investigations to move industries forward. We're thrilled to be working with UC Davis as a partner in their endeavor here, and incredibly, obviously very proud of the fact for their NSF grant. Um, I myself did a short stint at the NSF, and I think there's wonderful people there, and the fact that we have a fantastic team of people here at UC Davis working on this is exciting and a vote of confidence for this industry. There are things that we can do to obviously work together and that academia in general can do. Um, I think there's a tremendous value in supporting this independent inquiry, as everyone knows. The empirical side of cultured meat, the basic and applied research that would accomplish being able to continue being funded and supported in publication and building the industry. Obviously, funding programs that not just address the scientific aspects, but science's first cousin, the philosophical and ethical aspects of new technologies and the paradigms that they create within society. And then also, UC Davis has a very unique perch from which it should be considering itself. This idea of the kind of interdisciplinary work that they're doing could become a model based on the way it's structured, and they have a unique opportunity to lay this blueprint for other universities that want to get into this space. And of course, defining and filling the intellectual white space. As a professional scientist, it is so rare that we get to sit front seat to more than one scientific discipline's birth. And I can tell you, as someone who gets to eat this product every day and work along some of the most talented scientists in the world, that we're forging such a new path, and it's so fascinating to watch happen. There's such an opportunity here for you, especially in the audience, to fill that white space. And in my last section, I'd just like to wrap up with how can academia help the cultured media industry? Well, I like to think of things in the short term, medium term, and then sort of the long term, or the persistent or continual. So I won't go through all of these, but I'll just highlight that short term, of course, are things like building a robust pipeline of talented, good humans. It's very easy to hire talented people, but we place a premium at Memphis Meats at hiring good humans who are very talented. And so building good humans that also know and have the knowledge to build systems of the future is really important. Appointing the government to independent sources of information that we can all debate together in good faith is really important, and academia plays an important role there. And of course, working with industry to sort of build, in the public sector, to build these best practices for the cultured meat sciences and engineering space that is now emerging. Medium term, of course, there's no substitute for the idea of the necessary tension between research, ethical reasoning, and sound theory. So this idea of reinforcing the notion of intellectual honesty and curiosity and critique is important. I think UC Davis can play a role here, as well as, and then moving over to continually being able to invite people in and go serve elsewhere. If you're listening today, I'm a huge advocate, if you've heard me speak before, for not only working in industry. I love working for Memphis Meats, but I also really loved working in the U.S. government as a policymaker. And as a professional scientist, I do believe that we have a cosmic duty to making the universe a better place for everyone, and doing so through our minds and our actions. So if you are considering, one way to help the cultured meat industry is getting trained at UC Davis and then going and working and making policy for the entire country or vis-a-vis the globe. I've included some specific metrics of success that could be used by any academic institution here as a first stab at some of these particular areas of interest. Placement rates within companies, for example. I wouldn't be a startup member if I didn't have some metric of success I was attempting to measure. But one thing I want to note here, if you take this all in particular, in aggregate, is that none of this work happens in isolation, and that science does not occur in a cultural vacuum. that this all is interdependent, and that our successes aren't just dependent on one particular industry, one particular person, one particular company. At Memphis Meats, we've taken this approach of helping guide the industry as best we can. But I really want to, again, appeal to the group here, the people that are listening. You are the reason that we're doing this, but also you're going to be the people that improve upon this industry and mature it and bring it into even the next level of technology past this. Will be based on some of the work that's done here. So I want to emphasize the role of you in this process. Anyway, I want to express my gratitude again and to the staff at UC Davis for hosting this. On behalf of Memphis Meats, again, I want to say thank you for having us.
Thanks, Eric. Well, at this point, we'd like to bring Dave. Oh, Dave's back. Okay, good.
Here.
And we have a whole bunch of questions here. So let me get started with. There have been a few questions about the humane practices of recovering these cells that are used in the initial stage of the process. Can you talk? One of you talk? Dave? Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems right now is there's kind of a lack of, at least for academic researchers, is there's a lack of cell lines to use. And so we're working on isolating some of those. I think, once some of the details are worked out on how to do that, it's probably going to get more humane in how they're collected. So I don't know if Eric, you want to maybe chime in on this one.
Sure. Yeah, there's multiple ways to collect this, and it really again comes down to your ethical framework in which you're using. And again, that's going to vary by. I don't want to pretend to speak for any other company but there you can collect from an adult animal, you can collect from juvenile animals, you can collect from embryonic tissue in the case of, for example, an egg, if you're using chicken, or any other embryonic tissues, for example. But there's lots of potential ways to do this. There's no one particular right way to do it. And I think that really comes down to the particular ethical framework that maybe a company adopts. But Dr. Block is correct. There needs to be a healthy cell line banking initiative effectively, or banking availability for each company when they produce their animals.
And, because basically, I think it's probably pretty likely that stem cells will be involved, because if you need, in our calculation, and again, we're not producing a product, but our calculation, you're going to need the cells to probably double 40 to 50 times before they get to a reasonable production scale. And most differentiated muscle cells, or maybe all differentiated muscle cells, will not double that many times. And so going to a stem cell or cell that's got stem cell characteristics is probably going to be important to get to large scale.
Right. And at Memphis Meats, we use animals that are already destined for the food supply, so that we can capture cells that we can use indefinitely. Or the goal, of course, is to use them indefinitely. It's a good question.
There's also a question about the intersection of genetic modification and this technology. Is there any implementation of genetic modification in the development of this?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And again, it really depends on the company. But again, at Memphis Meats, yes, we use genetic engineering as a tool in the toolbox in the interrogation of cells. And again, with my background in genetic engineering, I have a doctorate in genetic engineering of embryonic stem cells, for biomedical applications. It's obviously something that's very, very routine within scientific disciplines in a very mature field. I think there'd be no disagreement from Dr. Block or Dr. Waterhouse on this. But the notion, again, it comes down to what your company's choosing to do strategically. But yes, there are applications for using it as a tool for interrogation or for production. I don't know, Dr. Block, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, for the work that we're doing, we're trying to mostly avoid that and see if we can develop cell lines without genetic engineering that will be viable cell lines. But it's probably a faster route to use genetic modification. And so I would guess there's a mix of what's going on in industry. For us at UC Davis, Professor Pablo Ross, who just left the university but still acting as a consultant for us, for instance, has actually isolated embryonic stem cells from cow and some other kinds of animals that we'll likely be using for our research with NSF. Um, and these are cells that will grow indefinitely, not easily, but indefinitely, more or less. And so that's the first place for us to start. But we have talked to other potential collaborators and research institutes who are getting this stem-like character of the cells by using genetic modification.
Yeah, I don't want to gloss over that before we move on. The key characteristic that most groups are going to look for in these cells is their ability to grow indefinitely, or at least have a very, very long lived life, basically, like working life. That's very important, and that is a direct translation from the from the biopharmaceutical industry. A lesson learned that has worked really well.
And I will point out that when we're talking about the source of the cells, the way this works is that you would isolate those cells once, and then you would bank those cells, keep them frozen in liquid nitrogen for the lifetime of your product. And so if you did have to injure an animal to get those cells, you'd be doing it once to produce basically a lifetime of product from that company. So it is a different, uh, it's not like you always have to go out and find an animal to start from. That would be a one-shot deal.
So, Dave, I think this is a question you might be able to answer. The question has to do with what do the folks in animal science think of this project? I think you actually have collaborators in that department, don't you?
We do. Anna Denicol is working on the cell line development, taking over from Pablo, and Payam Vamani is also working. He works on nutrition, the nutritional quality of meats. Um, it's interesting. It's complicated. I kind of started answering one of the questions in the chat about this. It's complicated because people who raise animals for a living, some of it is very large companies, but some of it are families that have been doing this for generations, and it's their livelihood. It's their way of life and has been for a long time. Um, and I would say you get the same range of reaction from conventional farmers that you do in probably animal science departments. Um, I personally feel like a lot of the raw materials that are going to go into growing cells for cultivated meat are the same or very similar raw materials that would go into feeding a cow, for instance, or a chicken. And so that I think creates the opportunity of, because the raw materials are there, located there, and the meat processing is located there, I think it's at least an opportunity for either as an intermediate or as an end game to have producers do both. And I don't think that's a model that's set up yet with any of uh, the let's say startup companies, but it's probably something that many people are thinking about.
I'll even add just briefly, because it's an important question that again I think the industry is still wrestling with as a whole, is this notion that, but we do know that the growth that's about to occur over the next 50 years, there's so much room in the delta of the demand that's going to be required for meat, that we've mapped out and believe that that there's plenty of room for not only us but also existing producers, should they obviously to continue producing animals for food. Again, we're not here to tell people what to eat or not to eat. We want to give them a choice, and hoping we earn their purchase and their dollars and their trust, because our product is delicious. That's our goal.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Eric, there's a question here which is kind of interesting. It's from someone who's in the food service management, and they're interested to learn more um, so they could get more involved in this. And have you thought about how to interact with people in food service? Like, I mean, training them or recruiting them. What have you been doing in that area?
Well, first off, to whomever asked that question, thank you for keeping us fed during this trying time, and sincerely. And second, the Yes, I mean, for Memphis Meats, obviously, we believe that working with culinary professionals and food service professionals is integral to our success. So we've already begun that work, working with people in the Bay Area and across the globe, candidly. And we've already worked with wonderful food service professionals. So step one, I'd be like shamelessly just say, come work at Memphis Meats. Well, we want to work with you. But more, I would say, more diplomatically, uh, come work and shamelessly try to push Dr. Block here and his colleagues to bend some of this learning into a program that could benefit and directly teach to this particular domain. But hopefully, if we've done our job correctly, we're hoping that consumers won't have to change their behaviors too much. So that these products would slot right into existing culinary techniques and applications.
And I would just add to that, I've talked to a lot of the companies, people at a lot of the companies, cultivated meat companies, and it's very interesting because there are some companies like Memphis Meats where it's very clearly understood that they're first and foremost a food company. But there are some of the startups that think of themselves as a tech company and haven't realized yet that in order for this to be a viable product, it has to taste good, it has to smell good, it has to cook like or better than a regular, conventionally grown steak or chicken breast or whatever. And that's and there has to be food safety involved throughout the whole thing. So, for companies like Memphis Meat, it's part of what they do, and hopefully the other companies will catch up.
Um, Here's an interesting question. Um, would the meats produced here, say, let's say a fish product, how would that affect someone who might be allergic to that fish? Would these products avoid the allergies that you'd find in a natural meat, I guess?
Great question. So yes, if they're meat, they will have the same allergens as meat, unless they have, again, being that they're the same muscular tissue. And again, this is well established, but also there you can. So you would have to label it as you would have to label it as seafood, and let's just say it's a shellfish. You would have to label it contains shellfish, and if you had a shellfish allergy, still avoid these products unless they had been specifically produced to eliminate with a high degree of certainty that allergen was no longer present. And I say this putting my former FDA hat on for a second. Being able to demonstrate the removal of an allergen is incredibly high bar. I know the wine industry uses egg whites, for example, as a clarifying agent, and again, that's an allergen. So there's a level of scrutiny around that, for example, to make sure it's removed. So the short answer is yes. If it is the same, if it is it has an allergen because it is seafood, then it will have to be labeled as such. And we don't want consumers to get confused or have to change their behavior.
Okay, here's a super technical question for Dave. How about using XF medium as an alternative to uh, FBS? Do you know what that is? I don't.
Uh, I don't know specifically what XF is, but let me answer the question a little bit more generically, and it gets to some of the other things that are in the chat as well. Um, I think what's likely is, if you get rid of serum, the first step is to use recombinant growth factors that are produced and purified as hopefully as inexpensively as possible. But if you do that, it's still probably going to be too expensive. And so somehow you have to reduce the concentration of them or find more potent ones, or ideally get rid of them altogether. I didn't mention this, but I worked in the pharmaceutical industry and specialty chemical industry produced through fermentation for 5 years earlier in my career, many years ago. And we were doing these huge fermentations up to 40,000 gallon fermentations. Um, and the products we were producing were very inexpensive. And so the media ingredients have to be very, very inexpensive, and they have to be things that are agricultural waste products or byproducts and so forth from corn processing or soy processing or whatever. And I think that's probably the direction that most of the cultivated meat products will have to go as well. So yeah, first get rid of the serum. Second, get rid of this very specific proteins. And if you can do that, you'd have a fairly inexpensive product. Easier said than done.
Um, Eric, you mentioned earlier that your first product had the low price of 18, what was it, 18K a pound or something like that.
It was a steal, 18,000 a pound.
So there's a number of questions about what's the current state of the price technology balance. Where are we now?
We haven't set a price per pound in a while, and so I'd be loath to do that right now as well. But it really comes down to, of course, like what are we going to charge for these products in reality when we get into market, and also and so their value to consumers is one. But our goal is, of course, to be on retail shelves everywhere. That's our goal. Again, Dr. Block's right. Like, we are a food company that sees itself as producing safe and high quality food products.
So
So
there's a related question, Eric, which
sure.
is will these products be sold under your brand, or will you distribute these through other companies, I guess?
Yeah, interesting. Again, an interesting question that really gets to sort of, again, it depends on which company. We currently are doing an owned and operated model, and really do want to sell under our own umbrella. But there's certainly many opportunities on the road, especially to be able to potentially be able to work with a co-manufacturer, or co-producer, a co-packer of some sort. But again, that's going to come down to closer to market sort of questions.
Uh, Dave, someone's asking, are there undergraduate research opportunities?
They exist at Memphis Meats too.
Yes, the short answer is yes. We have now 13 faculty members working in this area, probably more like 15 at this point, just at Davis. And so you can contact me or any of the other people's names I put up, or you can contact me and I can direct you to one of them. I have several undergrads working in my lab right now. And as we really ramp up, which should happen by next quarter, there should be plenty of opportunities for undergrads in all the labs.
Yeah, I want to just take this for a second. The notion of, like, how do you get in? That's a question I get asked a lot, and I think it's one of the most interesting questions, because it's every strata of life stage that has asked this, from established professionals like that we're talking to today, to the high school students wanting to figure out how do they structure their career, and everywhere in between. And I'll tell you this: the simplest way is, right now, this is the ideal time, because you can put and have an outsized influence on the shape and the direction and the contours and the overall arc of this industry now. So again, I can't emphasize enough reaching out to Dr. Block and the folks at UC Davis and asking and having that conversation, because they're open to having that conversation. And then there's opportunities to work with companies like Memphis Meats as well in those spaces, so that you can choose and figure out, like, what is it I want to do? How do I want to be a part of a changing world? And how do you want to be a part of potentially a solution in that way, in that, as we grow and have to modify and improve our food supply?
And just in, like Eric said, just saying maybe what he said in a slightly different way, but undergrads should feel free to contact me or other, if they're not on UC Davis's campus, at their own campus. But also doing internships between sophomore and junior year, or junior and senior year, is a terrific way to know whether you want to be involved in that industry later on, and to check out a company, have them check you out, and so forth. And so I would highly recommend just Google cultivated meat companies and start writing letters for
Yeah,
internships.
I'll just shamelessly say, I'm a first generation college graduate. I wasn't supposed to be here. Sometimes I don't know how the heck I ended up here. But I will say, I can tell you that I can point to educators like those that we're speaking with today, that helped me realize and think strategically about my life and my career. And I grew up relatively poor. I thought I'm a very tall human being. I played college sports. I played basketball, and I thought that was my way out. So I'll tell you, if you're thinking about how do I do this, I don't even know. I don't have a mentor. I will tell you, reach out and talk to these professors. Ask for advice, get help. If I can escape the cornfield I grew up in, you can definitely do it. Um, and reach out to me. I'll shamelessly, if you're not hearing from Dr. Block, I will shamelessly put him in front of you or talk to you myself as well. But I'm sure he will.
We're going to have to wrap this up. I got one last question. What's the term that's going to be used in marketing these products? I mean, is it going to be cultivated meat that you've been using tonight? This questioner asks, what about the term clean meat? Or is there going to be no differentiation between these products and those from animals?
If you don't mind, I'll jump in on this.
You're
I
the
think there's a
expert on that. I'll let you take that one.
So you've heard us using different terms. We use cultured at Memphis Meats, and Dr. Block using cultivated. There's no wrong term right now, other than the term that's disparaging. Candidly, terms like lab grown or synthetic are just not terms we use as an industry. I'll shamelessly plug. We've created a coalition called the Alliance for Meat, Poultry, and Seafood Innovation, and it has 7 members of different, all representing the different production methods here in the United States that are producing this, and we use. Cultured or cell-based or what have you. And so one of the things that's important to note is that it's a negotiation with the U.S. government on what term. Ultimately, we believe that the consumers are going to want to know that these products are made this way and that there's value in disclosing how they're made. So whether it be cultured or cultivated, at the end of the day, the number one thing is we make sure that they're safe, and that's through the U.S. government, and that, for example, their facilities are inspected properly, that they're labeled, again, that they're labeled properly. But like the eventual what's going to be on the label is a discussion that's ongoing with the U.S. government and our own industry. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to know that most companies will likely have to decide whether they want to or not disclose the production method. And then one last thing, if the product is different, we haven't talked about that, but if it is materially different from a conventional meat product, it would be required under the law in the United States to be labeled as different. So there is a requirement, a trigger for it to be labeled. But let's put it this way, TLDR, ongoing discussion amongst the industry, but it's a good one, and it's a normal discussion. It's an industry that is maturing like ours.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I want to thank you very much. It's been a stimulating discussion and lots of interesting points raised. I'm looking forward to my chance to buy a cultivated meat product in the near future. So thank you very much. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. We'll probably send you the list of questions and see if you want to give us some additional answers. But for now, we'll thank you very much, and I'll move on to our some closing comments. In 2 weeks, we're hosting the Wine Business Cleanse Lecture with Michael Osborne, the founder and CEO of wine.com. He will talk about how online sales of wine products provide the consumer with much more information than traditional venues. On Wednesday, March 24th, we host a Sips and Bites discussion on mead, the best thing you have never tasted. If you're very interested, you could even order samples of the 2 meads that will be tasted at that event. And then in April, we'll have another Sips and Bites, a taste of Ohlone culture, and hear from 2 UC Davis professors who study indigenous food and the 2 founders of Cafe Ohlone. You'll also be able to purchase the foods to be tasted at this event. I'd like to call out some thanks to our friends of the RMI who have helped support this program. And on your way out, please fill out our brief survey to guide future programs. And finally, I hope you enjoyed this evening's presentation, and good night.